we 5 minutes in?
Yep.
I think this movie is a secret genius because this is all parody stuff, dude.
Hey guys, welcome to Suspenders of Belief. I'm Heavy.
And I'm Traby.
And tonight we watched Varsity Blues, baby!
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
So Varsity Blues is a film that I have watched for so many years. The film is over 20 years old, which kind of makes me feel old when I think about it. But I watched this probably younger than I should have. It is rated R, and it's very much an R movie. You do have plenty of swearing and adult context and et cetera, et cetera. It's a coming-of-age story, though. It's about a 17-year-old football player who's a second-string quarterback. You know, and he kind of lives in the shadow of the pro player, and everybody loves him, and he's very nice. He's not the egotistical jock of a stereotype either, like the lead quarterback's actually just a really nice, decent guy. And so the setup of the movie, though, is our protagonist is the second string. He's the one who's sat on the bench all 4 years of high school. He's really never gotten to play because he's always been not quite as good as the other quarterback player. And so the story kind of jumps off where, well, what happens when something happens to that quarterback player, and now he's got to step up and take his shoes. So the movie kind of follows along that story. But man, Varsity Blues, it's such a great movie about football, where football is glorified but not the main character. And I think that's one of the things I love about it so much.
Yeah, I was thinking, you're very familiar with this movie. This is my first time watching it, so I'm coming in relatively cold. I only have like vague impressions of it from parody and trailers and things that I remember. And to me, this one was just, isn't high school football the best thing ever, the movie? Which I've never had any interest in at all. I played football in middle school, and it was pretty miserable for me. And this definitely characterizes a lot of it, or encapsulates that experience for me in a lot of ways. It's pretty accurate. My experiences weren't that dramatic and ridiculous in some of the ways of it, and I was in middle school, so I wasn't going to strip clubs and getting drunk, but there was a lot of it that was pretty accurate. And so this was never something that was on my radar whatsoever. But upon watching it, it's like, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Like, there are times where it's so silly, it borders on parody, and then there's other times where it's like they actually have something to say that feels meaningful. But yeah, it's fine. It's just not necessarily my favorite thing.
I think one of the reasons why it resonated so much with me is that West Canyon, the fictional town where this takes place, doesn't exist. There is a canyon near Dallas, but this isn't supposed to be there. It's just a fictional town that takes place in. But anyone who's ever lived in a smaller town knows what Friday night lights, what the local town getting together for the football team, like how big that was. I mean, I graduated from Katy High School, where football is king. And just as a student of the school, when you'd see so much money being poured into the football program, every year getting new jerseys, every year getting new equipment, every year getting new stadiums built, and constantly just money just from the district. Every fundraiser was to fund them with better stuff and more things. And as a person who wasn't in the football program, just kind of living in the school, seeing just how much money and how much time and how much investment was focused on football, it was so frustrating. It was just one of those, like, there's other things in the school too here, guys. We don't just play football, but football being such a big deal and controlling so much of the money and just of the currency of the town. So whenever there's the first football game and you like shots of the town and everything's just dead and nobody is out, everyone's all at the football game. Just little moments like that I feel this movie does kind of ride that line of almost feeling satirical or bordering on the edge of parody, but it really does a great job at capturing what life in small town Texas is like, especially how it impacts the community and how it impacts those involved with football.
It feels relatively authentic, apart from some of the really ridiculous stuff, but it does feel pretty accurate. It's, with my experiences, Vanderbeek is good at football, so he's elevated. I was bad at football, so I was basically spat on. So, I didn't have a lot of experience with it in a positive light whatsoever, so I've never even gone back to football or think about football in any other way than just being extremely dismissive of it. But it is a big deal. And I can understand why school districts would want to pump a lot of money into it, because that's also revenue, because if it is a popular pastime for people to just come and show up and watch the games, if they show up and we're winning games, if you have 20-something championships in a row, then yeah, you're going to get like a huge community to rally around it, and it'd be a really big deal. So it makes sense that it's framed that way. It doesn't seem just arbitrary, like, oh, these people are really into football for no reason. It's like, no, there's a reason for it. Like, it's all justified.
Because you do have, again, touching on those more satirical moments, the little brother is probably the most, I guess you'd say, out of place character. But one of the things I loved the most about him was I think I identify more with that little brother character than anyone else in the film, because everyone else in the film has like their own agendas going on, where they're very focused on, what life is, where you're going, what are you living up to your full potential? Are you creating this dynasty? Are you part of the legacy of this team? And on all the little things. And the little brother is just like got his own agenda. He's just curious about the world. He wants to know more about philosophies. He's constantly like, every time you see him trying out different methodologies between, he has Islam, you see him where he's got Christianity at the very beginning of the film. You see him where he's like got his own cult. He's doing his own religion. But he's just a GT kid in a small town and has no way to express his intelligence and creativity. So he's just making his own journey, trying to discover himself. And I just found that fascinating. I loved how out of place that kid was in the story. And he reminded me a lot of King of the Hill, where you can kind of watch it from an outskirt perspective and think like, oh, this show is so ridiculous. All these characters are so over the top and so cartoony. No one's like this in real life. And I think that's why this movie feels so close to home, is like, no, but I really knew people like Tweeter. I really knew people like Billy Bob. I really knew these kind of guys. So when I watch this, it reminds me of childhood friends, whether you want to blame it on culture, nurture nature argument, or just maybe we all have friends like this that are, have to be the center of attention, have to be the life of the party, have to be the one constantly cracking up and getting in trouble. This is a nostalgia the movie experience for me, because even in its more dramatic moments, I still had friends who went through big dramatic things. So it just, this is a movie that just, it cuts me deep when I watch it. And even some of the more sillier things, I have a good time watching this one.
Yeah, it definitely, most of the movie feels very authentic, so I think you're right. Whoever was involved in the writing of it was basing this off of their actual experiences. And in terms of authenticity, there was a handful of people in the movie that I could tell where their accent was authentic, but a lot of them are faked, of course, but they're not too distracting, they're not too bad. For the most part, I think everybody did a pretty good job with it. And in terms of performances, Voight really steals the show. Like, he really sells it.
Whenever I watch this role, he's so good at being intense and being overly controlling, and just he commands respect. There's a great moment where you have a police officer talking to a local in town, and they're complaining about the antics that the football players are getting up to, and he just kind of like casually looks over his shoulder. My boys, too much trouble for you? And he's like, no sir, coach, they just being kids. Like, he still has that fear and that respect over these guys he probably coached 20 years ago, and he still has that presence in town. And it's just a nice little moment of understanding that the antagonist of the film, he really is just maybe aggressively too invested in his own legacy, sure, but he's not really a bad guy. You could definitely argue it with the pushing the athletes too far to the point of like hurting themselves. That's obviously too much. He literally puts his hands around like the neck of a student at the end of the film, which to me as a teacher just was like thinking, oh, okay, so he just gave up on being a coach right there. And I actually have to give the film some credit, because I think he knows that the character, he tries to backpedal. All right, we're gonna go out, we're gonna win that team, everyone follow me, we're going, let's go. And he's trying to pep himself up, but like you can tell he's broken, you can tell he's defeated, and you can tell he knows he's lost, because we see him walk out the door and kind of stand alone and just kind of revel in that silence and that defeat as he slowly walks down the corridor.
Best shot of the movie.
Yeah, and then the last time we see him, he's in his office cleaning it out. So he knows he's gone too far. He knows he's messed up. And that's really nice. A lot of times you don't really get to see the villain get served their comeuppance in a satisfying way. In Matilda, you get the kids pelting the crunch ball with the pudding and the food and stuff like that. And this was a little more dignified, more mature version of that, but it was still had that same feeling.
This is 1999. This is the final Kids Own the Adults movie. I was a little afraid when we got to that last little stretch of the movie that they were going to try to redeem him, because they're playing some sentimental music whenever he's like cleaning out his office. And I'm like, are they gonna try to turn this around? Because he has been nothing but villainous this entire movie. And like you said, the climax, he's going to strangle a child. It's like, I don't know that you can just come back from that. But it was something. It wasn't just he just walked out of the picture and that was it. Like they gave him a moment of reflection as he was walking down there, and then that bit where he's packing up, it was something, and it made it feel a little more human in that moment without going so far that it undermines the whole movie. It was just something like, this is a real person and he's really thinking about what his whole experience has been, and it gives a little more weight to it.
Even the announcers make a comment that they were looking on the sidelines and they can't find the coach anywhere. Like, he doesn't go back, he doesn't cool off and then go back and try to take over the game again. Like, no, he walks away, he accepts his defeat. And it's one of those that this character, everything we've seen about being in control, every time that they do something successful in the field but it's not under his direct authority and his direct command, he's annoyed by it, he's angry even when it does work. So he is like an an absolute control freak. So the idea that, he walked away completely from it does show some growth for a character who you'd never think that a person like this would show growth in a movie. He actually does have a little bit.
It's something, but he feels real, I guess, is the thing. Even though we don't know any more details about his life or his upbringing or anything, he does feel, I guess, authentic in that way too. But that feels accurate. And again, that whole ending, just giving him just a little bit of weight, just a little bit of humanity is something I could respond to. Because especially at that point in time in the movie, I basically checked out because it's like, all right, well, Vanderbeek is going to go to Brown, and they have supplanted the coach, so he is not in power anymore. And there's not really a whole lot to tie up here except for, giving Billy Bob an ending. And that's really the crux of it. That's the only thing that kind of holds it together. And that it's good that they did it that way too, because we've been following Billy Bob for the entire movie. We relate to him. We understand what he's going through, and giving him the real emotional resolution for the last 5-10 minutes of the movie is definitely the way to go. It kept me interested, because otherwise I would have been reading my phone and everything, because I don't care about football. I didn't really care if they won the game. And we were talking about that. It's if they lost the game, that would actually be kind of cool, because then they could kind of divorce themselves from the coach's legacy and be like, that was the one year that we lost, and now we can build up our own team and pursue the championship on our own terms. But no, they doubled down, and they did indeed win.
That's one thing I like about the film's authenticity that you mentioned, is it's not just in the main character's coming of age story, and it's not just in the coach being single-minded and all the things that matter are just winning these titles, but a lot of the other characters we get a lot of screen time with. Billy Bob, we're there throughout, him constantly struggle with both being the center of the coach's aggression a lot of times with his it's all on you, it's your fault, you've got to do this, we're riding on you. He's very, very hostile, and it kind of seems like he does that to everybody. But we get a lot of information through Billy Bob, where Billy Bob gets hurt and he goes to the nurse, and the coach visits him and it's like, don't worry, boy, you're gonna play every minute of that game. It's one of those what are you doing? That's the opposite of what the nurse said. Oh, you think the nurse knows more than I do? I'm the coach. That kind of thing, where he's aggressively using his power and authority to trump other people of importance. And there are other characters, you have Brown, who is another football player, who mentions that the football coach is you could be at the most forgiving, say accidentally racist.
Oh yeah,
where he doesn't basically give him the football whenever they're within the 10 yards of the goal. He always goes to some wide receiver. So the main character makes an intentional effort to give it to Brown, maybe too much in that last game, because he gives it to him so much that he actually gets hurt. But the idea that, he's subtly doing what he can to improve the aspects of the world that he lives in are kind of nice, because he's very much passive in his own story, not just in the film perspective, but just in his life. If the events of this film hadn't happened, he just would have been sitting on the bench reading his books instead of being in the moment. And so by Lance being injured and taken out of the picture, he actually does have to step up and take some ownership of his life. And in doing so, he really kind of proves what kind of a person he is. Because when you're sitting on the sidelines and not taking ownership and not in control of your life is passing you by. But whenever he's handed the ball and given the opportunity to show what kind of a person he is, he does some really great things. He really helps some people who are hurt. He helps some people who don't think highly of themselves, because you have the quarterback who gets hurt. You have his ex-girlfriend who thinks that her only way out of here is through the success of a guy, and he kind of encourages that, no, you're talented and you can do this on your own, you don't have to be with somebody else. And it's little moments like that, he uses his power for the greater good, and that's kind of a nice character. That the fact that he's not that cliche the power corrupts absolutely trope. It doesn't actually happen. He's not given this all-star quarterback and then start treating everyone like trash. You have that one scene where he kind of flirts with oh no, is he going to be with the other girl or not? But he very quickly is nope, I'm out. I can't do this.
Yeah, that whole scene is about the only time that he kind of flirts with doing the wrong thing. Because for the most part, he does everything right. He's like a Mary Sue. He's very good at football. He's very good at everything, and he makes all the correct choices. And that's not really a character arc. That's just stuff that happens to him. But in that scene leading up to him, when Allie Larder's like, hey, come over to my house tonight. My parents are going to be gone. He is tempted, and he does indeed show up. And once he is faced with what he's about to do, he realizes, no, I just can't do this. And it's great. It's a nice little scene, because I think a lesser movie would play that up maybe he would have slept with her, and then his girlfriend would have been mad at him, and then he would have have had to make it up to his girlfriend, but instead it was like, no, it's one of those have your cake and eat it too. It happens a lot in anime, or at least good anime, where it's like, oh, we're going to do some fan service. We're going to show the girls in a revealing outfit. Maybe they're going to bend over or whatever, but we're going to write like a quality character scene around that and have that in there. But it's like, yeah, but they also could have done that scene without the whipped cream bikini. It could have still functioned the same way, but it's also something memorable. I remember that in the trailer. I still remember people making fun of it. It's well done. That's the one moment in the movie where I give it a little bit of credit, because it did show that the main character is fallible, possibly, but even then he kind of backsteps that. So it's just, yeah.
Well, and it's not as though the character lives in a world without mistakes. He's constantly not listening. He's constantly questioning authority. He's constantly disobeying both his coach and his dad. So it's not as though this main character is supposed to be perfect or always making the right choices. He just doesn't feel like he belongs in his world. And rather than just whining, though, he does take action. And I do think that it's nice, those little moments that he gets to kind of improve the world around him, that he does something with that.
Yeah, it's definitely a feel-good movie. There's nothing in it that's too heavy or too problematic even to take anything away from it. It's interesting, when you looked it up earlier, you said that it was under the category of like a cult classic on HBO Max or something, which normally that's attributed to something that failed at the box office, but I hadn't looked this one up to see if that was the case.
No, this one they made for cheap and it was pretty successful. So I think the only reason why you could classify this necessarily as a cult is that it has a tremendous following from people who have seen it. Like, there's very few people who I've ever talked to who have seen this movie and are like, oh, that movie's terrible, I hate that movie. Usually when I bring it up, people are like, oh yeah, that's a great movie. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to watch it with you, is honestly kind of a fresh pair of eyes. Is I love the movie, but I have all kinds of personal reasons to look at this movie. But it's also a film kind of like Jingle All the Way that I've overanalyzed to death because I've seen it so many times, and I look at all the little characters and the little moments and the reactions and the growth, and thinking about all those things, maybe too much so. But at the end of the day, when you watch a movie, whether it's a sports ball movie or not, is it just a good movie that I enjoy, or is it genuinely a good film? And so that was kind of what I was hoping to gain from this experience. But overall, so what did you think of this movie?
This is not necessarily my wheelhouse at all, and I've seen like peripherally a handful of like sports oriented movies. It's a good comparison. It's like I've enjoyed Rocky. Like, I love that movie. This one is in the same vein. You wouldn't necessarily guess that superficially. Like, based off of a trailer, you think it's just like a big dumb party movie where there's just jokes and there might be some boobs and there might be some profanity and drinking and blah blah blah. And like, you're like, that's not like Rocky at all. But like, no, fundamentally it is like telling a story about a character through the framework of some sort of sports, whether it or some sort of sporting event or some sort of sporting activity or whatever. And this is in the same wheelhouse as that for sure. But no, I enjoyed it just fine. It's not something that I'm going to rush out and go get a copy of or anything like that, because it's still too foreign for me. There's no spaceships, there's no magic, there's no nothing. But I can still appreciate it from a filmmaking standpoint and be like, yeah, it worked fine.
So we had to recover ourselves a little bit after Balls of Fury. So I feel like the Varsity Blues was a step in the right direction, but I still want to keep it mixed up this month. So we're going to do some more sports ball movies. Is there any specific category or some other angle you want to tackle?
I don't know. I don't watch enough of these movies to have a real idea of what else we could try, but I think we should pick something out of like left field.
Well, there is a film that, as a teacher, I have seen countless times at various trainings. There's a specific part of the movie that comes to mind, and I have not seen this film, but I still know the scene well enough that I can tell you what film it's from. And as fate would have it, I stumbled across a copy.
Oh.
Next time on Suspenders of Belief. Facing the Giants?